you very much. Thank you for having me, and if I may, I might also return your mobile phone to you. Sorry. Thank you. Please bear with me a little bit. I've brought a little cold with me to Tallinn. I'm sorry for that, and I hope my voice will hold up. I would like to say thank you to the organizers for inviting me, and I don't yet see my presentation up on the screen, so I do hope that it's still going to come up. But what I was going to do, while I hope that the presentation comes up, was I was going to talk a little bit about some main characteristics and factors that influence integration in terms of needs, intentions, and integration challenges of Ukrainians. And I would like to talk a little bit about some results and findings that IOM has had through our displacement tracking matrix. There we go. I also wanted to touch just on a few practical examples, or more precisely on some work that IOM did in a toolkit that brings together different ideas and approaches for the wider community in relation to things that can be done to support the integration and social cohesion of Ukrainians, specifically in the Ukraine response. But maybe if I can, just a few words on IOM, because I think we're still quite a largely unknown organization. IOM is in fact an intergovernmental organization. That means we have member states that decide at council level what IOM does. At the moment we have 175 member states, so that's really almost universal membership in comparison to the UN members. We were founded in 1951 in the aftermath of World War II, precisely to provide solutions to displaced populations and states. And that's unfortunately where we sort of fast forward to today, and it's still really quite incredible that today in Europe we're in a very similar situation in relation to forced displacement as we were in 1951 when IOM was founded. The last important milestone for IOM in its institutional development is 2016, when we became part of the United Nations system, and so since then we have been UN Migration. What we do is we support migrants across the world developing effective responses to shifting dynamics of migration, and what we want to do is to promote migration for the benefit of all. That means in particular migrants themselves, but also societies in host, transit and receiving communities, because we do really believe in the potential that migration has for all of us for human development, from an individual to a collective level. If we look at it more pragmatically in terms, but what do we actually do? I think there are 4 areas of work. One is migration management. An important one is crisis response. We work on international cooperation and partnerships, because international migration requires cooperation between member states, but it also requires a whole of government and a whole of society approach, including all the stakeholders involved in the process, from migrants themselves and members of host communities, civil society organizations, media, and so on and so forth. Of course, to our member states, local governments and national governments as well. And it needs international cooperation. And then the last part of our work is data and research, where we try and guide and inform migration policy and practice and contribute to evidence base for better migration policies. So integration is a very, very important part of our work. On the map here you see our global footprint. But actually integration comes into different areas of our work, whether it's migration management, and we consider integration policies to be a very essential component of effective and comprehensive migration management. But also if you look at emergency response and moving sort of away from the immediate emergencies into early livelihood creation and support, integration, social cohesion is really sort of the building stone for everything to then develop and hopefully improve again. On promoting social inclusion and good relations across diverse groups, we actually work in 3 areas. This is fostering welcoming societies, empowering migrants to navigate the receiving society, and facilitating the social and economic inclusion of migrants. So that's where labor mobility, for example, comes in, labor market insertion, and many other things. We also think that it's important that integration activities already start, ideally before migrants actually start moving, and are then linked up at every stage of the migration continuum. So if you think about migration from pre-departure, reception, arrival, then actually living in the place where migrants have arrived, and then also into the return segment, it's important to link integration activities across the broad sector of support into all of these areas, and then repeat, because as you said, I think circular migration is a thing. So we're not talking only about one migration story, we're talking about multiple migration aspects in which the integration needs to be factored in again and again. The main part of what I actually wanted to talk about today, though, was some findings that we have from Displacement Tracking Matrix. DTM is a tool that IOM developed in 2004 with a basic premise, which is to find out where are displaced populations and what are their immediate humanitarian needs. And we developed this in 2004 in Iraq, and then slowly continued to build onto this tool, which now has very many different aspects, which we employ not only in humanitarian settings, but also across migration routes, always with the intention of knowing who are the people in need, what are their needs, what are their intentions, to be able to provide support, not only through IOM, but through the international community. Reports that we have include this that you can see on the screen here, which is a country-specific report from surveying that we did in Estonia. We also have regional reports, for example, ones that compare Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, where these surveys have been taking place. But what I want to focus on now is something that usually looks like an interactive dashboard, but because this is a PowerPoint presentation, it's rather less interactive than it would be if you looked at it online, and I do encourage you to have a look because I think it's maybe quite interesting and helpful. What we see here is the overview page, which shows us the 11 countries in which surveys took place, from Estonia in the north down to Bulgaria in the south. We see that our respondents, 20,000 of them, were overwhelmingly female. That's not surprising, really, 80% female, 20% male. And we see a quite broad variety of ages, including 60 plus and down to 18-year-olds. And the reason, obviously, that we don't have anybody else is this is the data from the respondents, and we don't survey children. And so, but still, that gives you a certain sense of who it is that we talked with in our surveys between January and September 2023. Because we're talking about integration, on this next slide, which is about the demographic profile, I think I'd like to highlight just one or two things. One is the first pie that you see, serious health conditions or specific needs. A third of the persons that we were able to talk to did confirm that they actually have serious health conditions or specific needs. And if you see the relation between integration and health, I think that's something that we need to be very mindful of. 47% of the respondents have children, and 91% of them on their journeys were actually traveling with immediate family members. So we can assume there quite a lot, and we know it also from our practice, and you all do as well. We are talking about a lot of women with a lot of care duties, and then sort of talking about the labour market insertion is, I think, where we're going to have the podium discussion later on a little bit as well. But what's also interesting in relation to labour market integration is the very high levels, and I think you said it as well, of education. 50% of those surveys have a secondary and 48% a tertiary education. So as you said, not only in terms of the education, but also the work experience. Looking at Europe's aging demographics and labour market needs, we would have quite a lot of potential here with the Ukrainians who stay with us over a certain time. This slide on registration and inclusion, I wanted to pinpoint one thing that's of some concern, which is children's enrollment in school. Amongst those we surveyed, 33% said their children attend classes online, 34% said they attend local schools, 21% said online and local schools, which is good and also poses additional challenges both for teachers but also for the pupils themselves if you're doing twice the schoolwork you're supposed to be doing. And then 9% across the 11 countries who said they don't attend school. We did drill down on that, and the reasons are quite multifaceted. A lot of them, fortunately, said they plan to enroll soon. Some said they had other reasons. There were 51 respondents in total who said they didn't get a place or their children were refused in school. And there were some who said that they don't actually know how to enroll their children. So again, this is a small sample of an overall big amount of Ukrainian refugees in the 11 countries, but still it sort of points to certain directions and things that need to be thought about in terms of inclusion. And then challenges. I want to delve just a moment on something that we touched upon, but I just wanted to sort of make that a little bit more visible in the discussion on Ukrainians. And that's the left side of the slide, which is the question whether people had experienced any forms of abuse, violence, or similar discomfort or exploitation. 66% of those we surveyed said yes, they'd experienced shooting and bombing or threat of shooting and bombing. 42% experienced homesickness or large levels of distress. 40% still faced severe hardship during the journey, like lack of food, drinks, sleep, and hygiene. And then 9% mention emotional abuse that they've experienced, from threats of physical assault to humiliation, intimidation, and insults. There's lack of information, and there's quite a lot more things there. And I think if we're talking about labour market insertion and all of the chances, we also have to think about the efforts that we need to actually help people to manage that. And then on the main inclusion challenges on the right side, I'm not quite sure whether you can see that very well, but I do see that there are repeater screens there. So maybe just very briefly, overall, the top 4 challenges were the language barrier, financial issues, a suitable job, and housing, long-term housing. I also put Estonia up there just simply because we are in Estonia, and I thought it might be interesting for you to have a little bit of a comparison. In general, the top 4 are quite the same. There are some others that I think are also important to mention because we're talking about migrants and refugees. Discrimination is one that some have identified as an inclusion challenge. There's also access to social services, or school or preschool for children, which of course if you don't have anywhere that is looking after your children, you're going to have difficulties in actually thinking about further inclusion. And some more, but the top 4 important ones: language barrier, financial issues, a suitable job, and housing, long-term housing. On employment and the financial situation, I'd like to start in the bottom right, current employment status, and I think that's really quite good and quite unusual in comparison to other migration situations that we've seen. 39% of those that we surveyed are actually employed, 22% are unemployed, and 39% are inactive. This has different reasons, including, of course, people who are already past retirement age and simply aren't active participants in the labour market anymore. I talked about a third of people we surveyed with health issues. There are lots of single parents and parents with care needs, and more generally people needing to take care of family members in there who might also not be actively available for the labour market as well. But I think 39% employed within a year and a half is really quite unusual in terms of a trajectory of people who arrived through forced displacement. And then if you compare the occupation before leaving Ukraine and the current occupation, that's at the top left and right. I think I just wanted to mention a few things. We can see that in comparison to professional occupations before leaving Ukraine. That's dropped quite significantly from 33% to below 20%, and professional occupations are people that our labor markets would really need in terms of their professions, like doctors, like teachers, like IT programmers. We also see that elementary occupation, which is low-skilled work, like cleaners, like street vendors, rose from 4% up to over 20% of people occupied, people's occupations here. And so I think this is in line with other research that tells us that Ukrainian refugees seem to be working in their labor market, but sometimes they're not working according to their qualifications and their experience, with possible de-skilling, which is a problem, of course, for the migrants themselves, for our societies, but also if you think about the more long-term return and rehabilitation and building Ukraine back up again perspective, it's also not quite ideal. Because if you have a population that's being de-skilled here, it's going to be more difficult for them to really meaningfully contribute to building back up Ukraine. And this is the last slide that I wanted to show you in relation to integration challenges, and just mention very briefly also, we all know that one of the factors in integration that's really important is housing, because you actually start integrating when you have that part of your life settled, and you start settling into the community where you're placed more long-term, or where you're living more long-term. And here we see on the current accommodation types that while 32% of those we surveyed already are in an apartment that is an open rent apartment, so on the regular housing market, we have quite a lot of people surveyed who are still quite precarious, either because they're paying for their own hostel accommodation, because they're in collective housing. So the whole element of housing and long-term housing and then further integration is one that our surveys also show needs some work on. And then, because I'm really running out of time, I had wanted to go through this a little bit more in detail, but IOM did publish a toolkit, a social inclusion toolkit. This was something that we did quite quickly when we started engaging in the Ukraine response. What the toolkit does is it sort of collects experience that IOM and others have from other contexts and try to give some certain ideas, some good practices, and some further reading to practitioners to try and think about how to look and really invest into early inclusion policies and interventions that consider the medium-term and longer needs, both of the impacted populations, in this case Ukrainian refugees, but also how to develop capacities of local communities to support newcomers, which of course is a really important part of integration in terms of a two-way process. And so what this toolbox does, it looks at sequencing of longer-term support. So from the initial reception, it then looks at housing and health. And I think we can all agree health and integration are two very different topics, but they're very closely linked. And then it also looks at issues like language, employment, education, and family. And it also mentions some cross-cutting approaches in there as well. And maybe just to show you what it looks like a little bit more in detail, reception, this is about strengthening navigational support in reception. It features certain good practices, certain ideas, and it gives a lot of further initiatives on things like one-stop shops, both IOM's own migration information centers, but also one-stop shop models elsewhere. And it gives a lot of additional guidance and resources on how to set these up, what other models exist, and so on and so forth. And then this type of possible intervention and possibly innovative, or maybe not innovative, but well-tested and tried solutions, then basically streamlines through all of the different sectors I mentioned, including education, family, and social connections. And I think this is one that's really important to underline towards the end of my presentation. because we haven't talked about that much. But of course, what we need to do to build cohesive societies that welcome newcomers and address the needs also of those who are already there is we need to basically bring people in contact with each other through meaningful interventions and interactions. And there's one publication mentioned in this toolkit, which is The Power of Contact, which, if you're thinking about how to bring local populations together with newcomers, how to do that in a meaningful way, might be something that you could find quite interesting to look at, both in terms of concepts, in terms of methodologies, but also in terms of monitoring and evaluation this type of social contact to build cohesive societies. And that is where you can find the toolkit on facilitating early pathways to inclusive and cohesive societies. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Sorry about my voice.
Thank you, Marian. Any questions? We do have a question back there.
Hello, everyone. My name is Olga Gulina, Institute on Migration Policy, Germany. Thank you so much for your presentation. Working with migrants and their communities within the country, I always get every second had the same question to me, why we could not get the same procedure as Ukrainians. Many migrants told me that Ukrainians quite privileged group of humanitarian migrants. And now my question to you, whether you see this as also as a discrimination case. They always ask why we could not get the same procedure, the same access to the market. And it's like a lawyer, I always think that the way how, like the system which we apply on Ukrainians, it could help us to harmonize the EU migration scheme. But no one think about this and why. No, I know why, but it's my question to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Of course, I'm not going to go into the politics of things because that's not my role. But very pragmatically, I think the Ukraine response, the Temporary Protection Directive, and everything that allows for and how it's being implemented in different EU member states is really indeed quite interesting. And I think I'd look forward to a lot of research on this and in comparing integration trajectories of Ukrainians and the same trajectories of other nationalities who come under very different conditions. And I think sort of taking an example from Austria, where I'm usually based, where we can see this is relating to one of the aspects of social assistance to Ukrainians. Austria has done something which is to sort of provide them with the same social benefits that they would otherwise provide to asylum seekers. And if you look at the labor market integration successes of Ukrainians in Austria and compare that with others, you might come to the conclusion that the sort of type of social benefits, which is very different to the type of social benefits that others would receive, for example, recognized refugees or sort of the Austrian population at large, is different. And that's because the one system is supposed to sort of keep you in the asylum procedure until it's finished, and that's where the Ukrainians are a little bit stuck in Austria. And the other system actually is supposed to help you to enter into the labor market and to really participate in society. And so maybe that doesn't quite answer your question, but that's one of the examples where I think we could definitely learn from the Ukrainian examples, and I think a lot of evidence to show the benefits of precisely what's happened with the Ukrainians, if we think positively, that could also apply in a different kind of migration system for others. I think that would be a really interesting academic exercise, and we need the evidence base for that.
Yes, thank you.